I'm often criticizing the far left and criticizing the far right. I'm basically pissing off everyone some of the time.
Sounds fun. In the same interview, Sam Harris describes himself as being essentially in the center politically. And we could just accept that answer and move on with our day. Because, to be honest, and in spite of the fact that I made this entire video about it, I'm not really sure if there is a whole lot of point in debating a public intellectual's political leanings. At the end of the day, you can agree with someone or disagree with them, and they can claim whatever political affiliation they want. But on the other hand, humans all look for role models to help us shape our understanding of the world, and Sam is a popular and influential figure who has no doubt been a role model for a lot of people. We live in complicated times, and finding people whose opinions we trust is essential to how we make sense of everything. In a 2018 SPLC article, Sam Harris was accused of being part of a pathway to the alt-right, which in my opinion is a pretty serious misrepresentation of his views, but if you did believe that that was where his ideology ultimately points to, it would completely change how you view the rest of his work. And this author is far from the first person to accuse Sam of having hidden political motivations. If you don't know who Sam Harris is, I'm impressed you've made it even this far, but here's a boilerplate introduction for your trouble. Sam Harris is a popular and sometimes controversial author, atheist, philosopher, podcaster, neuroscientist, and creator of the Waking Up meditation app. Sam is certainly no stranger to pissing off people on the left.
And we have to be able to criticize bad ideas. And
of course we do. No liberal doesn't want to criticize bad
ideas. But Islam at this moment is the motherlode of bad ideas.
Jesus.
So we have
That's
ideas
just a fact.
like blasphemy.
It's an ugly thing.
Apostasy.
It is one basic liberal
Well, let me
principle.
unpack it.
And some of his recent comments about the Hunter Biden laptop have done a pretty good job of pissing off people on the right.
Hunter Biden literally could have had the corpses of children in his basement. I would not have cared.
Now, I kind of doubt whether Sam would actually call himself a centrist, but that is more or less what he was implying in the clip at the beginning. Of course, it all depends what we mean by centrism. I think on paper, centrism sounds like a decently good idea. Buddhism and other philosophies often recommend a middle way between two extremes, and there seems to be an inherent danger in viewing everything through a single lens. But these days, centrism kind of gets a bad rap. I think one practical difficulty with centrism, especially viewed through the black hole of American politics, is it's often very hard to define exactly where the center is. You're probably familiar with the absurdities and horrors of the various political compasses, spectrums, and horseshoes, and it seems clear that what constitutes a centrist is very much a matter of perspective. Many progressives accuse centrists of essentially just being de facto conservatives, and you may have also noticed a recent trend of people saying something along the lines of, well, I used to be a pure blue Democrat, but now the left has just gone so crazy, I don't know what I am. In fact, here's a clip of Sam Harris saying essentially that.
I consider myself liberal and have always voted as a Democrat. I mean, until we dealt with this woke apocalypse, I would have certainly called myself a Democrat without much self-consciousness.
But we will get back to this and the so-called woke apocalypse in just a bit. One of the things Sam has said repeatedly is that he opposes tribal thinking. Sam is a rationalist who endeavors to view each issue without the biases of whether it supports the belief system of various in-groups. But in a 2018 Wired article, Robert Wright makes the case that Sam does indeed have the same biases as everyone else, no matter how much he tries to claim otherwise. More recently, in a somewhat contentious interview, Sam has continued to argue that he is not a member of any political tribe, despite some fairly compelling evidence to the contrary. So is it possible that through years of meditation practice and deep contemplation on issues of philosophy, morality, and the neural fabric of our minds, that Sam Harris really has transcended the biases of most normal men? Well, maybe that's not the most fair framing of the question, but let's take a look at some of the ways that Sam has agreed or disagreed with members of both the left and the right.
What is your ask?
No,
just condemn Islam?
The solution. The solution is very much what
we've
Nick
killed
is
more Muslims than they've killed us by an awful lot. We've invaded more Muslims.
I am not for more killing.
An awful lot. Yet somehow we're exempted from these things because they're not really a reflection of what we believe in.
You don't understand my argument.
Your argument is like, black people, they show each other.
That is not my argument.
This somewhat infamous exchange back in 2014 between Sam Harris, Bill Maher, and Ben Affleck has become sort of emblematic for the criticism that Sam is Islamophobic. And yeah, I do think Sam comes off as the more rational one in this debate, but others have leveled similar charges, perhaps stopping short of accusing him of actual bigotry. But in that Wired article I mentioned before, Robert Wright contends that Sam is too quick to see Islamic faith as a totalizing explanation for jihadist extremism and terrorism. This is a complicated issue, but I'll just say that I personally believe that while Sam is very critical of Islam and religion as a whole, and has made some controversial arguments around the profiling and torture of potential terror subjects, I don't believe that he's bigoted towards Muslims. If you disagree with that, that's fair, but in that case, the rest of this video really won't have a whole lot to convince you of. Speaking of potential racism, the next big controversy I want to touch on centers around Charles Murray, author of the extremely controversial book The Bell Curve. Sam, who is a vocal opponent of cancel culture and a vocal proponent of free speech, decided to host Murray on his podcast after one of Murray's speaking engagements at Middlebury College drew violent protests. Now, this whole incident was adjudicated ad nauseum, and Sam has maintained that he has no real interest in race and IQ, the topic for which Murray has become infamous for, and his desire to speak with Murray was primarily in the interest of giving Murray's work a fair reading and pushing back against what he views as a dangerous wave of cancel culture. In a contentious conversation with then editor-in-chief of Vox, Ezra Klein accuses Sam of allowing his tribal biases, there it is again, to cause him to be overly sympathetic towards Murray and downplay the amount of water that Murray's work has carried for racists over the years.
You have that bewildering experience because you don't realize when you keep saying that everybody else is thinking tribally, but you're not, that is our disagreement.
Well, no, because I know I'm not.
No, that is our
thinking
disagreement.
tribally.
Now, this is a thorny subject that I'm only briefly summarizing, but it's safe to say that Sam's conversation with Murray did a lot of damage to Sam's reputation. Sam has maintained that he feels that his decision to host Murray on his podcast was justified because it upholds his commitment to free speech and his willingness to broach controversial subjects. For some on the left, this was enough to brand Sam as a racist and possibly even white supremacist. And while I do disagree with this characterization, I think Sam could do a lot more to distance himself from some of the darker overtones of Charles Murray's work. Speaking of dark overtones, remember the quote about the woke apocalypse from earlier? Well, it's time to talk about it. See, Sam is what's known in the joyous world of online culture war as something of an anti-woke crusader. For many years, Sam was part of a loosely affiliated group of people known as the intellectual dark web. That is, until various ideological schisms caused various members of the group to turn on each other, which is a story I'm not going to get into because it's already been discussed far more than is warranted or healthy. But it's safe to say that a common thread that runs through many of the people that Sam associates with is a rejection of the cultural phenomenon that, for better or worse, has become known as wokeness. So what is wokeness? I'm just kidding. That's a terrible idea. I'm not even going to try to give a definition, but I think we can all agree that, at the very least, it is a slippery term that means different things to different people. I think a fair summary of Sam's position on wokeness is something like this. While Sam is on board with many of the progressive goals of reducing inequality, he feels the left is overly obsessed with identity politics and that many of the solutions they propose may actually be working against the goals they're trying to achieve. He also believes the left is too quick to censor controversial topics and create taboos that shut down open and honest dialogue. In the wake of the murder of George Floyd, Sam Harris released a podcast titled Can We Pull Back from the Brink?, in which he readily acknowledges the legacy of systemic racism in the US, as well as the police's failure to respond correctly in many situations, but goes on to say that he feels that the angry protests are misguided and potentially even damaging to the social fabric of the United States. He makes the case that most people don't actually know how many people are killed by police each year, about 1,000 people per year, and that the so-called epidemic of police murdering black people is actually exaggerated in many people's mind. He also acknowledges that this perspective is probably going to piss a lot of people off, but feels it's important for him to say it anyway. Now, this podcast was an hour-and-a-half long monologue with a decent amount of nuance and relevant facts that would be hard to quickly summarize, but my takeaway is this. As we've noted, Sam is a rationalist who puts a lot of emphasis on evidence and decries emotionally motivated reasoning. Sometimes I think it kind of makes him the epitome of this famous line.
Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong.
Am I wrong?
You're not wrong, Walter. You're just an asshole.
Okay, then.
Now, my point is not that Sam Harris is an asshole, although I'm sure even he would agree that sometimes he does come off that way. Rather, I feel like he neglects the amount of power that emotion carries in the socio-political landscape. In the lead up to George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery was murdered while he was jogging, and Breonna Taylor was killed by police in her own home. Now, maybe from a purely logical perspective, these events could be separated. The circumstances were different in each one, and statistically speaking, they fall within a tragic but small number of events that occur at more or less the same rate each year. But when you combine the proximity of these events with the dark history of race relations in the US and the already volatile environment of a country dealing with the anxiety of COVID lockdowns, there's just simply no universe in which the brutal murder of George Floyd is not the spark that ignites the powder keg of social unrest. Now, I have a feeling Sam would probably agree with some of that, but I think he feels it's his mission to be the cool voice of reason even when everyone else is supposedly losing their minds. And there's certainly a place for that, but in my opinion, if Sam is truly interested in some form of political centrism, he could do a much better job of engaging compassionately with people on the left. But we'll get back to that.
I've said on several occasions that I think Donald Trump is a worse person than Osama bin Laden. Now, the statement is obviously meant to get your attention. I get that it's surprising, but it's not meant to be hyperbolic. I can defend every word of a statement like that.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that angered a few people on the right. Sam's fierce opposition to Trump has become a point of contention between him and many of his former colleagues. Various people online have accused Sam of having Trump derangement syndrome, implying that his blinding hatred for Donald Trump is clouding his judgment and making him unable to see the political landscape clearly. And Sam himself has sharply criticized some of his previous collaborators for falling victim to the cult of Trumpism. Here is Sam talking about former classical liberal turned conservative grifter Dave Rubin.
In Rubin's case, in my experience, he got inducted into a political cult, right? And I couldn't get him out.
Of course, it's worth pointing out that being opposed to Trump does not automatically put you on the left. There are plenty of conservatives who have been very critical of Trump, and among the type of intellectuals that Sam tends to associate with, you might think that opposing Trumpism is sort of a low bar to clear. Nonetheless, similar to Dave Rubin, many of Sam's fellow intellectual dark web members, that's the group I said I wasn't going to talk about anymore, have become quite sympathetic to Trump. Often under the familiar pretense of, well, the left just went so crazy that I had no choice but to support Trump. I don't agree with everything he says, but at least he's fighting that woke mob. And I'm sure you can tell how I feel about that rationale. Another viewpoint that separates Sam from many of his conservative counterparts is his more mainstream views on COVID vaccines and policy, which, again, may not seem like a strictly political issue, but of course, in the realm of American politics, it kind of is. Asked about universal healthcare in an AMA, Sam made it clear that he believes that as society gets richer as a whole, social safety nets should increase, and he believes that the current US healthcare system does a very bad job of caring for its poorest citizens. In the past, he has also voiced support for raising taxes on the wealthy, decriminalizing drugs, and has stated that he has never voted Republican in any presidential election. In his book Free Will, Sam argues that conservatives' view on individualism is misguided and that liberals do a better job of understanding the role that luck plays in determining someone's fortunes. Throughout his work on moral philosophy, Sam has consistently emphasized the need to strive towards a world that promotes the well-being of all people and social policies that account for the vastly different hand that people are dealt. Perhaps that's not a strictly progressive worldview, but in my opinion, progressive politics put a much stronger emphasis on that than conservative politics. It's probably also worth pointing out, Sam is a vigorous defender of atheism, and so for a lot of Christian conservatives, that is already 100% a non-starter. I think there's a reasonable case to be made that if not a conservative himself, Sam does disproportionately engage with and give a platform to conservative figures. It often feels like, despite various disagreements with their worldviews, that Sam is more than willing to extend charity to conservative viewpoints in the interest of open dialogue and honest debate, which would be totally fine with me, except that I feel like he consistently is not willing to extend that same charity to people who are further left than him. Now, this may be in part because Sam has taken a lot of flack from the left over the years, and he often claims that the left has unfairly misrepresented his viewpoints, which I believe is true in certain cases. But come on, Sam, when you criticize progressives as being too tolerant of Islam or unwilling to give Charles Murray a fair reading or being too angry over the murder of an innocent black man, you know it's going to stir up controversy. And sure, it would be great if everybody read your words carefully and extracted the exact meaning you were going for, but that's never how the game is played, and it's not a reason to write off the left as being incapable of engaging in good faith debate. Perhaps a more accurate placement for Sam on the political spectrum would be the warm and fuzzy label of center-left. That accounts for his more progressive social and economic policies while leaving plenty of room for anti-woke sentiment. But again, centrism, whether left-leaning or right-leaning, is very much a matter of perspective. I think a lot of people on the far left wrote Sam off as conservative years ago. And his open hatred of Donald Trump has been more than enough to alienate him from many members of the right. As I said at the beginning, it can feel a bit superfluous to debate these questions, but because Sam does have such a large platform, I don't think you can deny that he has influenced a lot of people's perspectives, and I think it's safe to say that some of his content has pushed people towards more conservative perspectives, but whether it has also pushed an equal or greater number of people towards more progressive or liberal perspectives is a question that can't be definitively answered. I also think Sam's writing about spirituality and the release of his Waking Up meditation app has guided a lot of people towards perspectives that are very universal in nature, and I think that a big part of his popularity has to do with his ability to attract people from a large swath of the ideological spectrum. I certainly don't think Sam is free of bias or immune from tribal thinking, and there seems to be many areas where he's unaware of his own blind spots. And whether Sam would agree with that or not, he has made it clear that he has a deep philosophical commitment to viewing everything through a politically neutral lens, which is great in theory, but I think he overestimates the extent to which it's possible for any human being to do in practice. Now, this is going to sound like a huge cliche, but that's never stopped me before. I think there is value in seeing both sides, and I think there is value in having compassion for other people's viewpoints even if you strongly disagree with them. And for what it's worth, Sam Harris's work has opened my eyes to different viewpoints even if I don't agree with them. I just think he should maybe cool it with the anti-woke stuff a bit, or at the very least have more guests on his podcast who disagree with him about wokeness and are further left than him on other issues. And if he doesn't, well, I might just have to make another video titled Why Sam Harris is a Conservative. But that's all for now. Please like and subscribe. Check out some of my other content. It has 98% or so less words about Sam Harris in it. Okay, goodbye. See you next time.